Hello there, true believers, and welcome back to another episode of Tier Talk, the series where I go over media franchises old and new to rate them based on my own experiences and preferences before your very eyes. As always, if you find this video entertaining, let me know with a big ol' thumbs up and consider hitting the subscribe button for more geeky content from the Northeast's biggest nerdy stuff lover. Without further ado, let's jump right into this list with today's topic of conversation, Spider-Man video games. Y'all should already know the spiel by this point, but basically, Spider-Man is a huge part of my life on multiple fronts. He's my favorite superhero, his character is inspirational, and has some of the zaniest adventures put to film, comic books, and also video games. Since my earliest days of playing video games, I can remember a time when I had some form of Spider-Man media to play in my downtime when I wasn't breaking boxes or blowing up walking battle tanks. So today I thought I'd take the time to measure the webhead's interactive adventures based on the games that I've owned and or played. Just remember, this entire list and the things I'll be talking about in this video are my opinion, so if there's a part of this video where you agree or disagree more, try not to roast me too hard in the comments. Or do, I don't really give a darn, discussion is discussion. And with that, let's just get right into it, starting with the first entry on this list, with the Super Nintendo crossover title, Spider-Man and the X-Men Arcade's Revenge. So I don't know how many of you guys out there are like retro enthusiasts, but we'll start with these Super Nintendo games because they're not the ones I remember the most, but they're definitely the ones that I've had to seek out the most. It's been very difficult for me to come into a copy of Arcade's Revenge and Maximum Carnage for no goddamn reason other than that they're expensive and they're never ever at my local hobby shop. But these two games are basically nostalgia bait. Spider-Man Arcade's Revenge is perhaps one of the games that introduced me, I think, to the X-Men in general. I wasn't super huge into the television shows by this point, and I don't think, because Wolverine is in his orange and brown suit in this video game, I'm thinking, or is that Gambit? But anyway, this was from a time that was before my time, and I didn't know all of the X-Men yet. So this game is a trip. It's a platforming game, and you swap it between playing as Spider-Man and also a handful of the X-Men to fight their villains that team up for some reason. In the comic books, these guys crossed over plenty of times, so I guess that they were just trying to bring that to video games. Now, in terms of the game, looks good graphic wise. It was on the Super Nintendo, and for some reason Super Nintendo games just have like a certain vibe. There's something about that era of video games that just really looks and sounds awesome. I can't really put my finger on it, but it's definitely a hint of nostalgia thinking about soundtracks from video games that came out about that time, and this game is no different. It has a pretty banging soundtrack and it looks really good. It's a platforming game and you play as a bunch of the different X-Men and all of their play styles are different. The only thing that comes into the same is that there's a button for melee attacks that smash. So it's not terrible in that regard. It's pretty solid, but there isn't anything really like special about it. It's just a crossover game. C tier. That's where I'm going to throw this one. And probably about the same for Maximum Carnage. The only thing I didn't like about this game was that it had a pretty gritty color palette. I don't know if anybody remembers playing this, but it's basically a beat 'em up game and Carnage is the final boss and you just fight a bunch of Spider-Man villains. You can play as Spider-Man and also Venom, I believe, if I remember correctly. I'm sorry, I don't have this one sitting on my shelf. I feel like that's a mortal sin with the amount of Spider-Man shilling I do on this channel. But you play as Spider-Man and I believe Venom, and it's basically just like, we need to take care of Carnage before Carnage kills the whole city, which is just about anything that Carnage has ever been in. So I just don't like the color palette. Everything that I remember from this game is that there's a lot of like black and brown and smudgy colors and stuff in this one, and that's probably just because it's a story about a serial killer that gets a symbiote attached to him, which is pretty brutal. So again, this is probably just a C tier game. It's fine. There's nothing like crazy special about it. It's just there's like this weird stretch of time where like Carnage is just not talked about at all until until like the mid 2010s again. He was on the 90s animated show, but then like he just wasn't in any television again for like a decade, which is crazy. So it's really special that Carnage was the star of the show in this game, and then he just wasn't for a really long time. And the next one, this one's just called Spider-Man, but I always called this game Spider-Man PS1 because that's the console I had and played it to death. I didn't find out until later that this game also has a port, namely to the N64, but I also think it has a PC port. So I'm going to call this the Spider-Man PS1 game. Yeah, this is Spider-Man PS1, and this is hardcore nostalgia bait. Hardcore nostalgia bait. I'm gonna place this one in an unholy rank. Like, it's probably, to me, this is looking through rose-colored glasses, but for like it's a good reason. I'm gonna put this in A tier, and the reason I'm gonna do that is because this game was lucky to have come out when it did. It crossed the threshold for the 90s where the Marvel like animated universe and like video games and comics and everything still talked to each other. Like, this game came out at a time before Marvel decided to well, they didn't really decide, they were forced to sell themselves, so a bunch of rights went to a bunch of different people, and this game still had characters like Captain America in it, still had Johnny Storm. They referenced all of the Marvel universe. Peter Parker was married to Mary Jane in this game, which is insane, and by today's standards, if you had adapted this, if you remade this game, nobody would know. Because it's such a weird thing right now. Peter Parker isn't married, you know, like in a movie verse or in a TV show or anything. Just recently in the Ultimate comic books in the year of our Lord 2024, he is married and has 2 kids in the Ultimate reboot. That's a new thing, and it dates this game a lot. But the story in it is pretty good. It's not focused on the symbiotes until like the last quarter of the game. You find out they're essential to the plot, but it has a ton of Spidey's Rogues Gallery in it. The soundtrack slaps like hell, and the voice acting is, like, in my opinion, this uses the voice actors the best. Like, there is very, very good voice work in this game, and it's, the lines they say are kind of hokey, and it definitely sounds and looks like a superhero flick, but there is something to this game, and it holds a special place in my heart, so I'm going to throw it in the A tier. They don't make them much better than this one. When they decided to follow up a plot where Dr. Otto Octavius, Dr. Octopus, uses Carnage to try and engineer a way to control the symbiotes, that's a crazy ass storyline, and they followed it up with Enter Electro, which is a story in which Electro manages to steal a super battery that turns his natural superpowers into some kind of really crazy, like, mega weapon, I guess. There's no other way to describe it, really. He's just a crazy son of a bitch with a huge ass battery, and like, that's the game. Because they used everybody in this first game, they had to use a bunch of B-listers to kind of fill the roles here. Like, the first boss in this game, if I'm remembering it correctly, is Scorpion. The first boss in this game is Shocker, and then you fight Electro on the rooftops, and he's got a ton of electricity causing explosions everywhere, and in this one you have to run away. The final encounter where you have to run away from Dr. Octopus with Carnage's symbiote. That's this game. This game is just Electro on crack. But like, there was an incredible graphics upgrade. You could actually swing through the streets. Characters actually looked like people and not just polygonal blocks. They had the fingers on their character models, whereas they didn't in this game. So graphically it's good. It's just the story and the cast was kind of bad. Well, not bad. It's lackluster. It was good. But if these two had switched, if you did all of this, but this was the first game and this was the second game, that just, to me, it makes more sense. Play Enter Electro before you play this game. With all that being said, I think I'm going to throw it in B tier, just right under it, because it has everything that this game does. The soundtrack is good and it looks better than the first game. It's just the first one outdoes it in terms of like story mainly. All right, next we're going to handle the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi, Spider-Man PS2 game tie-in games. Each one of these kind of loosely follows the story plot of their respective movies. They just do subtle things. It's not even subtle. They just do different things to make them different, so you're not just playing a carbon copy of the movie. Starting in this PS2 era, we will deal with the first movie game tie-in thing, I'm going to throw this one in the B tier. So while this one goes over everything that the movie does, it's an origin movie and it tells you about Peter and how he got his powers, but whereas the movie was like solely fixed on the Green Goblin, the game actually found the room to give Spidey some like a leg up to like show him growing to fight supervillains. So you fight the Shocker in this one, you fight the Vulture. I think there's even like a small Spider Slayer plot or something where you have to infiltrate Oscorp that's pretty cool. The only thing is this game is also still incredibly linear. They let you swing around in the open air, but they still couldn't render like a ton of buildings yet, or they hadn't figured out how. So you're kind of just swinging through empty space as you go between objective and objective to get to where you need to go. And the aerial combat isn't that fun. Like characters are very quick to disappear and they have to put a bunch of markers all over the screen. And they managed to get a majority of, if not the entire cast, to reprise their roles for the voice acting in this movie. This is an opinion that I've had for a little while that I will elaborate on now. It is not always a good move to hire a movie actor as a animated voice actor. They don't always jive because a person who's acting knows how to express emotion through body language and can be really athletic and pull that off really good. But because they have to use that to supplement their voice work, it doesn't always work out when you put them in a booth with a microphone and you tell them to imagine how the character looks. Whereas like a voice actor does that exclusively and can be really freaking good at it. So one of the things about Tobey Maguire, especially in these 3 games, is that he's very soft-spoken when he's not acting. So a lot of the phrases when he's like yelling at people still don't sound like he's yelling at people. You know, all of those really painful grunts and screams when he gets hit and blasted in the movies? Those don't exist in these games. And it really sucks because there are times where he gets like biffed with an explosive or a laser or something, and he just like crumples over and goes, ah. And like that's it. So there's a lot of that kind of mediocre voice acting in this game. In all of these games, really. And the swinging mechanics were dumbed down because they hadn't figured it out yet. But what's here is still pretty good. The side plots, they work. So for that, it's getting a B, and I feel comfortable about that. Spider-Man 2 is the GOAT, but I don't think it still reaches the S tier apex, and I'll explain that very briefly because part of it carries over into the 3rd game as well. Spider-Man 2 is legendary in that it really opened up what a Spider-Man game was supposed to be. By this point, by the time Spider-Man 2 had come out, I believe at least the 3rd and Vice City Grand Theft Auto games had come out. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's true. And those games really popularized an open world build. They showed that using technology the correct way, you can create a ginormous map for your characters to freely explore in. And they can do it while driving in cars, while riding on bikes, while flying fucking helicopters. It was really an eye-opening time for video games, and Spider-Man took full advantage of that after their first game came out. So somehow, I don't know how these guys figured it out, but they created an open world map that it did what Spyro did, and it blurred stuff that was far away, but then rendered it as you got close, and they perfected that. And then they followed that up with an incredible physics engine, so that way when you swung, you carried momentum, and the pendulums worked properly, and for the first time in this series franchise, for this series as a whole, your webs actually clung to a 3D space somewhere on a building, and then used that as your pivot point for when you were swinging. So the technological advancements for this game were incredible, and I applaud them for figuring it out and making it into a game that actually was fun to play. The combat in this game was great, the swinging and exploration was great, but it still has those crummy problems where it still doesn't look too good yet, all things considered. As a PS2 game, like, again, it's already pushing boundaries for being able to swing very quickly across a city without pausing to load shit, but character models still looked kind of funny. Voice acting was still pretty subpar, and honestly, it's like at the tipping point. I think these two games are iconic, and there's probably a lot that you could say succeeded and or failed for this game, but this established like a new standard for what a Spider-Man game should look like. The Spider-Man 3 PS2 game. Oh my god, holy shit. Actually, I don't even know if this was a PS2 game. This might have been a PS3 and 360 game by this point. I don't remember. I know that there was different versions of this game that look different, have different cutscenes, but I am currently staring at a version of this game from my PS2. So that's the standard that I'm going to judge it on. This game suffers from being related to one of the most awkward movies of all time, because it has to adapt weird source material. They want to hit the same notes that they hit in the movies while also adding some other entertaining shit. Graphically, they did a lot better than what Spider-Man 2 looked like, but like just barely. Character models still don't reflect light very good. Lip syncing was off pretty hard. Honestly, probably one of the things that they landed better in this game was the voice acting. Again, there's still some weird stuff. Tobey Maguire versus Topher Grace in this game is just strange. They're both pretty soft-spoken people, so when they're fighting or in combat or they're screaming at each other, it's not actually screaming. They just sound kind of funny. And oh god, the QuickTime events. I think this is what everybody brings up when they talk about this game, is the QuickTime events. If you fucked up a QuickTime event, you were treated to some of the most hilarious animation and what if scenarios possible. We'll talk about it more later on. It comes up again later in Web of Shadows, but this game tries very hard to improve on the groundwork that 2 set up for them. Unfortunately, I don't think they nail it too good. The game doesn't look that great. The buildings look better, traversal is better, the day-night cycle is faster, thank god, but there's just not a lot to love about it outside of that. This game is probably a C tier at best. It's like a low C, high D. At least for me. Okay, we'll talk about the Ultimate Spider-Man PS2 game. Now, just like the title says, this game takes place in the Ultimate timeline, or it adapts certain stories of it. It introduces characters and relationships from the comics and just kind of expects you to know about it, which is strange. Like, there's like backstory as to what the symbiote is and why Venom is going to be such a big deal in this game, but like that's kind of it. It doesn't let you know that Peter Parker is friends with certain people, that his attitude towards other people is different. They don't let you know how big S.H.I.E.L.D. is in this universe or anything like that. But you kind of don't have to know that stuff. You kind of just need to know the general relationship that he has with these people, and then it focuses on the stuff that matters, right? So it tells you right in the beginning that Eddie Brock and Peter Parker are a lot closer in this universe, so their relationship is different, and when one becomes a hero, the other's a villain and stuff like that. It's very well done, and it builds off of the Spider-Man 2 mechanics pretty good. You still have real world swinging, even if the web doesn't always attach to a building that you can see, but it still tries. Like if you hit a building on a corner and you're trying to swing around a corner, you still have that attachment point and that momentum. But if you're swinging like high above most skyscrapers and you get to some of the taller ones, sometimes your web will just go somewhere if you're close to a building and attach. Not sure how I feel about that, but it's not awful. It looks good. They use a comic book-esque, like inspired artistic style for the cutscenes and the graphics in this game, which I think benefits extremely well. It helps processing power because textures are simpler, and you remember this game based on how it looks. The soundtrack is kind of dull. Overall, it's not bad. I just wish it was a little better. Probably a B tier game. This game, if polished a little bit, would just be better. Spider-Man Web of Shadows is complicated for me for a couple of reasons. So when this game was coming out, I think in like 07 or 08 or something like that, it happened during the release of that generation of consoles, the PS3 and the 360. So a bunch of different versions of these games were made. There's Spider-Man Web of Shadows, I think it's called like Friendship or Friend Edition or something like that, and then there's the actual Web of Shadows. Web of Shadows for the PS3, 360, and PC is the version you want to play. This is the 3D version that goes through the whole city, and it's the version that has the really kick-ass combat system, and it has the updated character models, and it kind of builds off of a world, a relationship that's similar to the one from the PS1 era. Characters have been together for a long time, he's established friendships with a bigger Marvel universe, but not everything is the same as like One More Day Has Happened or something like that in this universe. That's what I gather. So it's a huge universe, and it really plays on the fact that Spidey has been like an Avenger, he knows other X-Men, he knows just a bigger world in this game, and it benefits a lot. So the main difference between these two is that this version of Web of Shadows, the Friend Edition or whatever, uses a 2.5D approach. It is a platformer combo beat 'em up game where you advance through a stage linearly and complete a mission and collect stuff along the way. This version is the 3D exploration one that's like your decision making game, where you get to choose bad decisions that align with the symbiotes or good decisions that align with the Avengers and everybody else. This version is dog shit. I hate this version of this game. It isn't anything. It doesn't have any of the stakes that is given in this game. The story is different. The characters you interact with are different. And to me, it's just more difficult. I don't know why that they decided to do this. Probably just to appeal and maybe get people to buy a better console to play the version of the game that they wanted to play. I don't know. But it made it so that way this 3D game was just a little bit shallow. It undershot what the potential was for this game. The web swinging in this game is kind of doo-doo. Not gonna lie, that might be a hot take, but the web swinging in this game is kind of doo-doo. It makes up for it in really stellar aerial and on the side of buildings like wall combat and stuff, but the game itself just kind of looks funny. I don't think it took processing power that seriously because there's like barely any cars or people in the streets. It is a coin flip of a game. You either love this one or you hate it. And to me, I love it, but to me, I think it could just be a lot better. I'm going to put the 2D version of this game in the D tier. That is a stinker of a game, and every time I think about having to play it again, I immediately start throwing up in my mouth. I'm going to put this version in the B tier because, again, this is a really solid game, and it could be just a little better, and it would be an ace. So far, none of these games have kind of stacked up to what I get out of these two. However, I think that's going to change, because for me, we kind of hit like, it's like a sleeper game, right? Like there was some weird rights things that happened with this series of games in here where certain studios made them and then their rights were bought out again, and then they were delisted, then they were relisted, then they were delisted again. So getting a copy of any of these games is now hard as heck. I luckily have a Shattered Dimensions copy. I do not own Edge of Time, even though I have beat this game. So I'm going to judge these two in their own sphere, because these two are also in their own sphere and these ones are also in their own sphere. So let's turn our attention to these two. Shattered Dimensions was Into the Spider-Verse before Into the Spider-Verse was a thing. These games are fantastic. They lean a lot more on the earlier roots of this franchise by being beat 'em up games, but they're still in 3D spaces. You proceed through a stage that focuses on a certain supervillain, and then you end up fighting them to gather a MacGuffin thing, and then you fight a big bad at the end. Now, what's unique about this game is that you play as 4 different Spider-Man, one for each stage in like a chapter, and each of them has a different play style and a unique thing about them that you don't get in any of the other ones. For instance, in the 2099 universe, you are chasing a guy. You are following a criminal in this universe, and it almost always involves you skydiving down the side of a magnificently high skyscraper that's literally endless until you advance to a certain spot in that part, and it's seamless, right? Like you could fall forever in the same spot until like you die and you lose health, but the second that you have crossed the threshold that the game wants you to, it will change into a new stage, and that's really cool. In the Amazing Spider-Man, you're basically just a hack and slash beat 'em up trying to rank up combos and stuff while also solving light puzzle elements. And then the noir versions are, I want to say it's like an Arkham City, Arkham Asylum ripoff, where you're just a stealth Spider-Man and you're trying to stay out of the light because you don't have all the fancy dancy superpowers. You only have some of the superpowers, I guess, is what the shtick about noir Spider-Man is. So you try to stay in the shadows. That's his gimmick. And then Ultimate Spider-Man is fuck everything up as hard as you possibly can. You have brutal combat abilities in this universe, and he takes full advantage of it. The graphics in this game are also pretty good. Each one of them has their own art style. For instance, all of the Ultimate stuff is cel shaded, all of the noir stuff is like black and white, the sepia tones, neon in the 2099, and then they do a weird comic book filter on the Amazing Spider-Man, so it all looks different. It also all sounds different, distinct and familiar, because every single version of these Spider-Man here are voiced by versions of Spider-Man that have voice acted them in the past. So Josh Keaton does the Ultimate Spider-Man. I forget his name. The 90s cartoon actor voices the noir Spider-Man. The 80s animated cartoon Spider-Man, I forget his name. I'm so sorry that I don't know any of these guys' names. Voice 2099 Spider-Man. And then the Amazing Spider-Man is voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, who voiced him in the MTV 3D CGI cartoon Spider-Man, which is a hell of a pull, but it's really awesome, and they are all previous voice actors, and they do a stellar job. There's also other Spider-Man voice actors in this, other like supervillains and other characters who were voiced previously by other people, and just really good voice talent. So this game is phenomenal, and to me it's basically everything with the exception of open worldness that I love about Spider-Man. But if I had to pick a spot on this list, to me this one hits on like a low A, high B, because it's all the nostalgia that you want, and it's such a comic booky game, and it's executed really freaking well. The replayability in this game is awesome, and it's very hard to beat. Like, this and the PS1 game are like on the same level for me. I will coin flip to play which one of these I want. Edge of Time is just directly underneath that because it does the same thing, it just has a much more straightforward narrative. It introduces original characters and concepts, and it uses the same engine that Shattered Dimensions use, and it also uses similar voice actors for their role. So you could tell that they wanted to build a game universe out of these things where they just keep talking to each other for like games and games and games, but that's not what happened. The Edge of Time didn't sell as much as Shattered Dimensions did, so this ended here. Edge of Time is still really good. The graphics engine is really good. The 3D animated cutscenes are also really good. Combos are fairly similar between each other. Like, if you played Shattered Dimensions, then these games are going to play practically the same. It uses an original plot as well, so it introduces old and new villains, but then also makes them cross over in a really interesting way. If you've ever seen the white symbiote attached to a monstrous Doc Ock, that is the villain of, or like the ending Abomination. It's actually what it's called, Abomination, in this game, is right before the final boss, and that's like the iconic bit about this game. People also like to use the speech from Edge of Time when they find out that Mary Jane's gonna die in an elevator crash, to symbolize why Spider-Man does the things that he does, and also to kind of disprove Miguel at the end of Across the Spider-Verse. So yeah, B tier. I'm comfortable putting it there. Y'all can fight me about it. I don't care. We'll go over the 7th generation video games really quick. So these games were made for the PS3. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was made for the PS4 era. When the PS3 was ending and the PS4 was beginning, that's when this game came out. So these games are kind of an adaptation of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. This one is supposed to contain a similar plot, but kind of goes off the rails with the whole human and genetic hybrid kind of thing. Peter solves the clue or whatever that helps Connors figure out the metamorphosis thing, but then he uses it, or the company uses it, on a bunch of different people. So all of these supervillains that were supposed to be like people in suits became hybrids. Like the Scorpion was a person and Scorpion hybrid. The Rhino was supposed to be a guy in a big rubber suit or whatever, but in this game it's a Rhino and person hybrid. It's weird. It's weird, and that's just how they choose to do it. This game pushed the reset button on what they wanted a Spider-Man game to look like. They brought it back to open world, which was cool, and then they just overhauled the combat mechanics. So it became a lot like the free flow combat in an Arkham game, where you have to dodge attacks because you're a weak human or whatever, and you're fighting literal monsters, and you need to dodge attacks, you need to use your web, which I don't think there were gadgets yet, but your webbing played an impact as to like who you were fighting and what. The marketing campaign for these games were also crazy. Sony definitely wanted these games to sell, so their marketing was really good. They used a lot of licensed soundtracks in their marketing, which I can appreciate. For me, it's a slight downgrade because A, they're still trying to follow a movie script. The voice actors from the Amazing Spider-Man games, like the actors themselves, are not the same as their movie counterparts. So like Andrew Garfield did not voice Peter Parker, Emma Stone did not voice Gwen Stacy. So I don't know, these are fine. To me, I don't like playing these games. Like I got the Platinum Trophy because it was just that easy for the PS3 game. The second that I finished the campaign for this game, I uninstalled it on my PS4. I did not like it at all. So for me, I'm going to put the first game in the D tier. It's not that great. And then I'll put The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in the C tier for a couple of reasons. So The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a direct follow-up to this game. So the way they went about it was The Amazing Spider-Man 1 existed, and then they made this game. This game doesn't follow the movie timeline piece by piece, and then the game is a sequel to the first game's universe. So it doesn't mimic the second movie, it is its own thing in a separate timeline. So it introduces new characters, like they did a Kraven subplot in this game, and the monsters from this game still exist in this universe. One thing I should also bring up is that Spencer Smythe is a major character who works at Oscorp in these games, and basically caused a ginormous disaster in this game, and the fallout of that happens in this game and is why Harry comes out of hiding. It's why the villains are born in this game, is because experiments are happening now. It's crazy. The combat is a step up in like every way in this game, and the web swinging is unique. They tied each swinging mechanic, so each swinging arm, to a different shoulder button. So like the L1 button, or sorry, the L2 button swings your left hand, the R2 button swings your right hand. It's interesting, it makes you set up a pattern, and if you don't follow your rhythm, then you fuck up and you just like fall out of the sky. It's weird. It's weird, but it's unique, and it's at least trying to do something unique. This game also tried to dive into like the more open world RPG aspect of video games that were growing popular. So you have dialogue options that you could talk to characters with, or you could just breeze through all the dialogue. You can try to talk characters out of stuff to make battles easier or harder, and not everybody has optional dialogue, and those of you do, you could just skip all of it, which is fine. And graphically it looks good, and for the first time in I can't remember how long, I think the Amazing Spider-Man, either the Spider-Man PS2 or the PS3 game, you could walk around as Peter Parker, like you could take off your clothes and go into buildings as Peter. But in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, you could just do that all the time. You could just like go into a store, into a house or something like that, change into Peter clothes, and they'll walk out on the street, which is crazy. I don't think you could do that in very many, if any, other games. So this game had some merit, but for me, because it's so detached from its movie it's adapting, which is already a bad fucking movie, you can check out my video where I talk about that one over here, but because it's adapting a movie I don't like, the game isn't also that great. I'll stick it in C because in many ways it's an upgrade from the first one, but it's still not very good. Alright, now we're going to do what's currently the Insomniac trilogy, or it's like a 1.5, it's like a 2.5, I don't know what you would call that, a duology and a half. Marvel Spider-Man PS4, Miles Morales, and Spider-Man 2. So right off the bat, these games are awesome. These games are so fucking good. Insomniac has done such an amazing job bringing these characters and this world to life. Okay, and unlike a lot of these on this list, I can't pick out very many things I don't like about these games. games. Like, it's very, like, there's maybe only like a couple of nitpicks that I would have with each of them. And I don't know if that's bias talking, because, or recency bias, or whatever you want to call it, because these games came out on really good hardware. But I hold these games to a very specific standard that these ones laid the foundation for. So we'll take a look at the very quickly, just go over this. Basically, my A list is being games that have good narrative, games that have good technical innovation, and then also games that are just fun to play. In terms of all of that, for these 3 games, I'm going to put the Spider-Man PS4, the OG, not the remaster. I'll definitely talk about that. I'm going to put the OG in the S tier. I'm going to put Miles Morales in the B tier. And then I'm going to put Spider-Man 2 in the A tier. So let me go over this really quickly. I'll do it a step at a time. Marvel's Spider-Man PS4 was a long time coming, especially after The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which wanted to do a lot. It set up all its ambition and then just falling on its ass execution. Marvel Spider-Man PS4, that's just what I'm going to call it. This game has an excellent narrative, fantastic voice work, animations and graphics are so damn good, and it is incredibly fun to play. It is damn near my favorite and probably the ideal Spider-Man game. This game goes over what it means to be Spider-Man. This game tries very hard to make Peter Parker's life relevant. It's not just, you know, you get in a costume and you swing around the city and beat up bad guys. Peter's life has value, and he has value to other people that he talks to and experiences regularly. So it makes a lot of sense that it goes intertwined. The whole Martin Lee and Feast wrapping up nicely with the Oscorp vendetta that Doc Ock gets like halfway through the game. It's just a nice little incident of domino pieces. And the fact that they adapt several origin stories at once while also making it their own original world is such a breath of fresh air, dude. They're able to skip a lot of that origin stuff and just dive straight into a world where like Spider-Man is here, you know? And that's, to me, that's so good. The combat was overhauled again, where it basically just built off of the free-flowing thing that Beanox set up with these 2 games and turned it into something that either you had to get really good at or just hit like a cheat button. The gadgets were broken in this game and they carried a lot of the combat, but that made it so that way like either dumb players could use the same thing like repeatedly and just a button to win, or you could get really flashy with it and have really interesting battles and stealth battle segments. It was really good. It was diverse combat, and for me that's so important. That's why I really liked Shattered Dimensions. That's why I really liked Spider-Man 2, is because they had options for good combat. So Spider-Man PS4 is my favorite Spider-Man game. I abhor the remaster, and I will die on this hill that the character model changeover for Peter Parker was a bad decision. I get why they did it, I understand the technical ramifications for doing so, and I respect them for making that decision and standing by it. It's just, for me, when you come out with a product and you release a person's face and that is supposed to be the identity you relate to with that character, and then you change something around for your own ease of access, and you make me invested in a emotional story that uses that person's face, and then you just change it all in a release, and an updated release a little bit later, really pisses me off. And the perfect comparison that I like to make here is just imagine your favorite movie. Doesn't matter what movie it is, doesn't matter who's supposed to star in it, doesn't matter who the character is that is leading this film. Imagine your favorite movie with your favorite actor in it. Okay, now imagine that they came out with a director's cut and they just recast and reshot every single scene that had the lead in it as Tom Holland. That's what happened in this game, and it pissed me off so bad. I refused to play the remaster, and I dreaded having to play Spider-Man 2 because of any of the scenes that were going to have his new face in those emotional scenes when I'd already glued the other persona to my brain. So again, that's not a slight on anybody. That is not a slight on any actor, voice actor, visual artist, animator, anybody. It is just a personal gripe that I have to live with now because I imprinted the first Peter Parker from the PS4 game into my fucking brain. But let's move on with it. Let's move on. We're going to talk about Miles Morales next. And this is basically like everything that I wanted for Miles Morales' first appearance in a video game. Because it's all of the loving stuff and all of the care that we get out of open world Spider-Man games and all of this jazz, except it's just Miles Morales now. And they are so good at representing him and his culture and the things that he stands for, and they go to lengths to make sure that you know this is Miles, this isn't Peter, but they're still Spider-Man, you know, like they still have ideals that mean a lot, and there's a weight to be carried here, and Miles can fit that bill, you know? It's so good to finally see him getting more media representation. I love that the animated universe is focused on Miles and not Peter. I love that he has his own standalone game, and also he's a crucial part of the campaign for the sequel. And it all starts here. It is a well-told origin story that forces him to grow up a little, you know? Finn being the Tinkerer is such a cool take. I love that so much. I love that it was his best friend, his crush, whatever you want to call it. He was close to that person, and she was just on the wrong side at the wrong time. I'm sure that given enough time that they could have hashed something out, but what this game sets up for the sequel is so good. Miles sees that his uncle is the Prowler, and he sees that Finn is the Tinkerer, and that they are these bad people, and he was forced to have to lose Finn. That sucks, and that sucks for him, and he doesn't want to keep seeing that happen. So what we see happening in the sequel, I'll talk about it later, is the repercussions of Miles becoming a hero, but not wanting to accept that like every battle has to end in violence or pain or somebody going to jail or getting hurt or something. And he learns that being Spider-Man is a serious gig, and I really like that he steps up to the plate. I really like the voice acting in this game, and I really like that their characters feel like real people. I just wish it was longer. The game has a banging soundtrack, and really that's the only reason why it's in B tier for me, is because it's just kind of short. It probably should have just been like DLC or something. It was too big to be DLC, but it was too small to be like a full feature-length game. Somehow they hit it right in the middle. I also really like that Miles' comic book superpowers kind of fit in nicely here, so that way they don't have to just ham-fist the same gadgets from Peter's arsenal into Miles' character. It feels different. When you play as Miles, it feels like you're playing a beat-em-up game from here. So really the only thing that takes away from this game that reaches it being up here is that I feel like it's too short to be like a full circle Spider-Man story. Like usually there's a lot of moving pieces, whereas this is just Miles' first outing, so it's kind of short, that's all. But Spider-Man 2 is where things kind of get spicy here, because this game brings every lesson and all of the cautious stories that Peter worked on in the first game, and then also the new responsibility and lessons learned that Miles figured out in his game. So in this game, the symbiote is introduced, Harry Osborn is introduced properly into this world. We're setting up things for next time while also closing some circles and making sure that character arcs are fulfilled in this game, which is a hard line to walk, but I think that it was done well. I think a lot of people's criticisms from this game kind of forget that like this is a sequel, but it's also kind of a beginning for new characters and new arcs as well, because they want to explore Venom as a character, they also want to explore Miles, and then they want to explore Peter. So Peter's arc in this one is now he isn't the only Spider-Man here. He has been through his struggles, he has been through his strife, and there's a part of him that wants a normal life now. And that part of him has always been there, he's just forsook it all because he felt the responsibility to being Spider-Man was greater than that. But he's also not alone anymore. Now he has Miles, who understands the pain and the lessons that Peter had to go through in the beginning, except this time the new Spider-Man doesn't have to do it all by himself. they do a symbiote invasion like Web of Shadows in this one, and they attach a morality thing to the Harry Osborn of this universe, which I think is an interesting way to go about it. I knew that Harry being here was going to be important because they always try to make Harry Osborn more important than he actually is. So seeing him get to have some kind of a role that, you know, actually made sense and was consequential to the story and will provide further context for later story arcs down the line was kind of special for this game, and I can appreciate what they chose and how they chose to show us the symbiote. It also combines probably some of the snappiest, some of the best combat mechanics in any of these games. That was Shattered Dimension's strong suit, was the different combos and stuff that they could choose, but Spider-Man 2 kind of blows that out of the water by introducing not only different like combat styles between two characters, but also two different combat modes for each character. That was really cool, and I can appreciate that a level of detail when you're engineering a game that has not one but two protagonists with different fighting styles. So all in all, I think this is kind of it, you guys. This is my standings of Spider-Man games as we have them, and also games that I have played. Each one of these has a different arrangement of memories for me, and I definitely have nostalgia for some games over others, but I play a fair amount of these pretty regularly as I go through the years here. When like a new Spider-Man game is announced, I'll play a couple of games in the series or whatever, so that way I can freshen up on combat and video gameness. So take with this as you will. If I left out a game that features Spider-Man or focuses on Spider-Man and you think it deserves to be on this list, you let me know. Tell me about it in the comments below. I'll be sure to read it and figure out my thoughts, and maybe I'll put it on the list in a further update, but for now this is kind of my standings. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think any of these needs to be in a higher or lower position? Definitely let me know. If you like this video, give it a big old thumbs up, and definitely subscribe if you like this. I make tier lists about every other month or so, and I go over a bunch of different content for those lists, so if you want to see something or what I would rank something else, definitely let me know. That's going to do it for me today, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate each and every single one of you. Be kind and rewind. Don't forget to stay awesome. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, Excelsior.